There's a specific kind of anxiety that comes with reading military strategy. I mean, usually we operate on this assumption, right? That wars happen when a country feels invincible. You wait until your GDP is peaking, your stockpiles are full, you're the strongest one in the room, then you make your move.
Which is logical, on paper at least. But if you actually look at the history, that's rarely how it plays out.
Right. And that is the hook of the material we're diving into today. The sources in this stack, they argue that wars don't necessarily start when a nation feels strongest. They start when leaders are terrified that their time is running out. It's not a crime of opportunity, it's a crime of desperation.
Or at least a crime of perceived necessity that now are never dynamic.
Exactly. And today, we are applying that lens to, well, the single most scrutinized flashpoint in modern geopolitics. The modernization of the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, and the whole potential conflict over Taiwan. And we aren't just talking about the hardware, though we will get into it. We're trying to answer the core question posed by these analysts. Is there a window of military advantage for Beijing? And, the scariest part, is that window already starting to close?
It's a fascinating question because it really does challenge the standard narrative. You open the paper and it just looks like China's military power is on this infinite upward trajectory. But the view from inside Beijing might be, well, a lot more pessimistic.
Well, let's start by defining terms, because window of opportunity, it gets thrown around a lot. I think a lot of us, myself included, we have this habit of looking for a date. You hear the Davidson window, that 2027 date, and you think, okay, that's D-Day.
And that is the biggest trap you can fall into. The source material is adamant about this. A military window is not a calendar date. You don't just circle a Tuesday in November and say, we go then. It's totally fluid.
It's an algorithm, basically.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The analysts break it down into 4 specific variables. Think of them like tumblers on a lock. You need all 4 to align for that window to be open.
Okay, I've got the list here. Let's run through them. We have capabilities. Can I actually do this? Confidence, do I believe I can do this? Opponent weakness, is the other guy distracted, unprepared? And finally, domestic stability.
Right. And the trigger logic is simple. If all 4 align, you act. But if one of those tumblers is out of place, say you have the missiles, but your domestic economy is in free fall, the lock stays shut.
Or you try to force it, which we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I want to drill down into that first tumbler, capabilities. Because the transformation of the PLA over, say, the last 25 years, it isn't just about spending more money. It's been architected for one specific problem.
That problem being the Taiwan Strait.
I was looking at the comparison the source makes to the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis. I remember that so vividly. Beijing tried to intimidate Taiwan with missile tests, and the U.S. just sailed 2 carrier battle groups right through the area. It was a humiliation for the PLA. They couldn't do a thing.
That was the pivot point.
Yeah.
That humiliation birthed the modern PLA. They realized they couldn't compete with the U.S. globally, so they didn't even try. They focused entirely on what we now call A280 anti-accessory denial. They built a force designed specifically to keep American carriers outside that first island chain.
And this is where the hardware specifics really, really matter. We aren't just talking about more infantry. The source highlights the massive expansion of the rocket force, specifically the DF-21D and DF-26 missiles, the carrier killers.
Exactly. And in the 90s, the PLA was what you'd call a green water navy, strictly coastal defense. Today, they're fielding Type 055 destroyers, some of the most advanced warships on Earth, and operating a blue water navy that can encircle the island.
And let's not forget the cyber component. The source uses the term integrated joint operations. This isn't just, hacking a website. This is about the kill chain.
Right. It's about blinding the opponent. If you can use cyber to disrupt U.S. satellites or scramble communications in that first hour, you degrade the American OTA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. You make them deaf and blind while your missiles are in the air.
So on the capabilities tumbler, they've clearly moved the needle. I mean, they have the tools now that they didn't have 20 years ago. But this brings us to the confidence tumbler, which seems much, much trickier. The source makes this distinction between capabilities and perception.
That's the key. You can have the best kit in the world, but if your leadership doesn't trust the generals, or the generals don't trust the tech because it's never been tested in combat, the window stays closed. The PLA hasn't fought a major war since 1979 against Vietnam. There was a lot of peace disease, as they call it, inside the ranks.
So they have the hardware, but maybe not the software, the human element. Okay, but let's pivot to the external factors, because this is where that use it or lose it anxiety really kicks in. The source argues that while Beijing has been building up, the strategic environment is actually getting worse for them.
This is the closing window theory. There's this belief in Beijing that waiting just doesn't help them anymore. If you look at Taiwan, it's not a sitting duck.
Right. Taiwan has finally started to pivot its defense strategy. For years, they were buying prestige weapons, big fighter jets, big ships.
Things that look cool in a parade.
Exactly. Stuff that gets destroyed in the first hour of a war. Now, under pressure from the U.S., they're moving toward the porcupine strategy.
Asymmetric warfare.
It's sea mines, mobile coastal defense missiles, man-portable anti-air systems, the stuff that makes an occupation a nightmare. And the source points out this shift terrifies Beijing more than the F-16s ever did.
Because it negates their tonnage advantage. You don't need a destroyer to sink a destroyer. You just need a cheap mobile missile you can hide in a warehouse. As Taiwan hardens its defenses, the cost of an invasion goes up, exponentially.
And it's not just Taiwan. The whole geopolitical chessboard is shifting. I was struck by the section on the hardening of alliances. We're seeing a dispersed U.S. posture.
The agile combat employment concept.
Right. So instead of having everyone sitting at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, basically a big fat target, the U.S. is securing access to bases in the Philippines, expanding access in Japan, and spreading out.
And that Philippines deal is massive. The EDCA sites give U.S. forces access to bases that are practically within eyesight of Taiwan's southern flank. That fundamentally changes the geometry of the conflict.
The source uses that phrase, deterrence thickens. It's such a visceral image. Every year Beijing waits, the wall they have to smash through just gets thicker.
And that creates the dilemma. If you are Xi Jinping and you look at these trends, Taiwan getting spikier, the U.S. spreading out, Japan doubling its defense spending, you have to ask yourself, is today the best chance I'm ever going to get?
That's the terrifying part. You don't strike because you feel perfect. You strike because you think tomorrow will be worse.
It's the logic of a declining power, or at least a power that feels its peak is passing.
Which brings us to the fourth tumbler, the one we often overlook in the West. The domestic clock. We tend to think of the CCP as this monolith that doesn't care about public opinion, but the source suggests the opposite, that the political clock is ticking even faster than the military one.
Absolutely. The unspoken social contract in China for the last 40 years has been simple. The party stays in power, and in exchange, your life gets better every single year. You get richer, your kids get better jobs.
But that engine is sputtering. We're seeing structural economic slowdowns, a real estate crisis that won't go away, youth unemployment spiking.
And don't forget the demographics. The working age population has already peaked. That means the tax base required to fund this massive military buildup is going to shrink every single year from here on out.
So connect the dots for me here. Usually if my economy is tanking, the last thing I want is a war. War is expensive, it's risky. Why does the source argue that domestic weakness might actually open the window?
It's the diversionary war theory.
Yeah.
If the party can't deliver economic growth anymore, they have to switch the source of their legitimacy. They have to pivot to nationalism.
Delivering glory instead of GDP.
Precisely. And reunification with Taiwan is the ultimate nationalist prize. It's the one thing that could theoretically cement Xi's legacy, regardless of what happens to the economy. The source puts it chillingly. The longer leadership feels constrained internally, the more external leverage matters.
It's just so counterintuitive. We see headlines about China's economy slowing and we think, oh good, they'll be too busy fixing that to start a fight.
Yeah.
But the analysis here says, no, that makes them more dangerous.
Weakness can be just as provocative as strength. If you feel the domestic situation sliding out of your control, a foreign crisis can be a way to reconsolidate power. It rallies the elite and silences dissent.
Okay, so we have a closing external window because of alliances and the porcupine strategy. We have a ticking internal clock because of the economy and demographics. That sounds like a recipe for extreme volatility. But surely these guys are rational actors. They're running the numbers. They aren't just going to guess.
They are running the numbers constantly. But this brings us to the section on the great gamble and the risk of misreading the situation. Because rationality depends entirely on what information you're being fed.
The intelligence trap.
Right. The debate inside Beijing and among Western analysts watching Beijing is about what kind of war they think they're fighting. Do they believe they can achieve a fait accompli?
Meaning they take the island in 72 hours, present the world with a done deal, and the U.S. just shrugs and goes home.
That's the dream scenario. A quick, decisive lightning strike. If the leadership believes that is possible, the window looks very open.
But if they look at Ukraine,
Exactly. If they look at Ukraine and see a short, special military operation turning into a 3-year meat grinder that destroys the economy and isolates the country, well, then the window looks firmly closed.
the problem is autocrats tend to get told what they want to hear. I doubt there are many generals walking into Xi's office and saying, actually, sir, the Americans will probably sink half our fleet in the first week.
And that is the point of maximum danger. The source identifies a specific concept called the escalation turn. It's not when the military is at its absolute peak strength. It's when the leadership convinces themselves this might be the best it will ever get.
The best it will ever get.
Wow.
That's a haunting phrase.
Because once you accept that, delay becomes synonymous with decline. If you think you're weaker next year, then risking a war today seems rational by comparison.
It reframes the whole deterrence conversation. We usually try to deter them by showing strength. But if we show too much strength too quickly, do we inadvertently convince them that the window is slamming shut and force them to jump?
That is the security dilemma. You have to arm Taiwan enough to make an invasion impossible, but not so fast or so aggressively that you trigger the very attack you're trying to prevent. It's a razor's edge.
So let's try to synthesize this. We started with the question, is there a window? The answer seems to be yes in terms of capabilities. They have the A280 bubble, they have the missiles.
But the confidence tumbler is shaking. And the opponent weakness tumbler is definitely not aligned, not with how the U.S. and Japan are posturing.
And the domestic stability tumbler is flashing red.
So the lock isn't clicking into place. Not yet.
The source material ends on a bit of a grim note looking forward. It teases the first 72 hours scenario. And it's not necessarily D-Day right off the bat.
No. We tend to jump straight to amphibious invasion. Thousands of ships storming the beaches. But the source suggests the next phase of this analysis, if the window were to be used, might start with something like a quarantine or a blockade.
Using that gray zone tactic.
Exactly. You squeeze the island, you cut off the energy supplies, you dare the Americans to shoot the first shot to break the blockade. It puts the ball entirely in Washington's court.
Which is almost scarier than a direct invasion because it's so ambiguous. It just blurs the line between peace and war.
And that's where the risk of escalation is highest. When limited force meets a hard counter-response, does it stay limited? Or do we spiral into total war?
This has been a heavy deep dive, but I think it's necessary to get past the surface level headlines. It's not just about counting ships or tracking GDP. It's about understanding that psychological framework, the four tumblers.
It moves us away from asking, will there be war? To asking, how does the leadership perceive their own time horizon?
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with that final thought from the source material that really stuck with me. We spend billions tracking the hardware, the hypersonic glide vehicles, the aircraft carrier launch systems, but the source warns that the scariest variable isn't the hardware.
No. It's the subjective belief that time is the enemy.
And unfortunately, there is no satellite that can take a picture of a leader's perception of time.
That's the one variable we can't measure until it's too late.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's a complex, high-stakes topic, but hopefully this framework helps you make sense of the noise the next time you see a headline about the Taiwan Strait.
Always good to unpack these dynamics.
We'll see you next time. Stay curious.